Thanks, Manuela, for introduction. It's a great privilege to be here. And today I want to talk about value, what it means in web applications, and how we can increase value more efficiently and faster. But before talking about increasing value, we probably first need to align what actually value means. And let me start with this first question. What is value, and what defines value? And on the first glance, we might think that price defines value. And my clicker doesn't work as expected, but still. The one that tastes better usually is more expensive, and we perceive it's like more valuable. But at the same time, the price for branded aspirin and its cheap generic differ a lot, even though it's the same molecule, the same effect, and basically the same product. So price actually doesn't define value. All right, but if it's not price, what defines value? Maybe it's cost. And the more expensive is it to produce product, the better quality must be. And therefore, again, we perceive it's more valuable. But if you look closer, we can find products having the same cost, even though the value will be still very different. The water in supermarket costs about €1, even though the same water in airport costs 8. And nothing has changed about water itself. The only thing that has changed is how much we need it in the moment. So cost also doesn't define value. And even if the cost and the price are the same, the value still can differ. The same teddy bear means a lot to a toddler, but is completely useless for adult. So, as you can see, it's quite hard to define value even for physical product, let alone the software. We all need to communicate, but what creates more value? Is it Slack or is it WhatsApp? So let me show how we thought about value in our company. But first, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Dima. I'm a Ukrainian entrepreneur living in Berlin. I worked more than 10 years in my career as a software engineer. And for the last 5 years, I worked as a CTO in a startup, the case I'm presenting today. And also, I'm doing right now MBA program at London Business School. And few words about Countix. It's basically a Berlin-based startup providing VAT compliance for e-commerce sellers. It was founded in 2020, exited in 2024, and I joined as a founding engineer in the very beginning, and stayed until the deal and post-deal, and left in September this year. So I might occasionally slip between perfect and past tense. I hope it won't be too confusing. At the moment, it's about 35 people. 1/3 is in research and development, the rest is in customer success, marketing, sales, operations. So it's basically the use case of a small startup. And for the most of the period, we worked at a single product team with a designer, product manager, few engineers, and we embraced few practices which allow us to maximize the value. But that brings me back to the question, what is value? And to answer this question, the economists offer this model, which is called the value stick, and it's basically defined by 3 points. At the bottom is cost, in the middle is price, and in the top is willingness to pay. The price and cost are quite straightforward, while the willingness to pay is more subtle and is hard to measure. But basically, it means the benefit that customers expect to get from the product. And if this benefit, perceived benefit, is greater than price, then customer will buy the product. But if it's less than price, then they will walk away. This willingness to pay is not fixed and can shift depending on the context. We have seen in the example of teddy bear, that it may depend on a person, but also it may depend on location. And for example, a fur coat is quite valuable in Helsinki, in Finland, but pretty much useless here in Malaga. But there is one place where the willingness to pay can be measured quite precisely, and this is auctions. And economists love auctions because of this reason. And you can see it on the individual level in every bid, or also on aggregate level in the clearing price. All right, and basically when we understand what is those 3 points, now we can see that the gap between willingness to pay and the price is the customer's surplus. This is basically the extra value they're feeling they're getting from the product. While the gap between price and cost, this is our profit as a company. This is value captured. And those things put together, they basically form the full value created. So as we can see, the value actually is defined by willingness to pay and cost, while price only defines how this value is being shared between us as product provider and the customer. And now, if we are talking about the way to increase value, there are 2 fundamental ways of doing this. The first one is reducing the cost, obviously, and this is quite straightforward way. It's usually less risky, easy to grasp, and many companies prefer this way of growing value. But there is also this other way, and this is the approach of increasing willingness to pay. And personally, I find this approach more fulfilling and inspiring, and I believe that most of you, at least people that create a product on a day-to-day basis, would agree with me. And when we are talking about increasing willingness to pay, then the next question, how do we approach increasing it? What features should we add or change about our product that it feels more valuable? In some cases, it's quite straightforward. The HDD with 5 terabyte will be more valuable than HDD with half terabyte. But usually, it's far from being that obvious. Imagine that we run an e-commerce site, and then we asking, what will create more value? New payment method or new shipping method? We simply don't know. It depends. Few years ago, I worked at a company that ran online auctions, and at the same time, we were considering 2 features. One was the packaging purchase feature, which allowed users to buy multiple products within one transaction using the buy now price. And the second was the shipping cost feature, which showed the shipping cost directly on the bidding page. And to understand the value potential between each of these features, we need to understand 2 things. What is the cost, and what is the impact on willingness to pay? So we started with estimating cost, and I think all of us are used to do estimation. This is part of our job, and it happened to be that the cost for shipping cost was much lower, while the packaging feature was much more complex because it touched too many parts of the system. It was order creation, invoicing, billing, and all in all, several microservices. When we eventually built both features, the real cost for packaging feature happened to be even higher. And this is usually the case because we tend to estimate smaller projects with higher accuracy. So eventually, all in all, the packaging feature took for one team to build about half of a year, while the shipping cost feature took about 3 weeks. But the cost is only part of the equation, and more importantly, the question is, what will impact the willingness to pay in a bigger scale? So let me probably check the intuition. Who think that the willingness, so packaging feature is more valuable? Raise your hand. Okay. Who thinks it's shipping cost? All right. I think it's more people thinking about shipping cost, and it's a great intuition, by the way, because when we build the packaging feature, it happened that it didn't change the customer behavior at all. So it didn't increase the number of items sold, and in fact, only few users tried this feature during the next year. But when we built the shipping cost feature, it had massive impact. So people could immediately see on the bidding page how much it would cost to move a car for example, from Malaga to Warsaw. And by the way, those objects were cars. And armed with this knowledge, they were far more willing to bid on a car from distant location. So this feature eventually attracted more bidders, increased the average price, and eventually significantly increased the revenue. So in other words, the willingness to pay for shipping cost was higher than for packaging features. All right, and now if I will reiterate, we basically built feature A and feature B. Feature A happened to be very expensive with no measurable impact, while the feature B happened to be very impactful and at the same time surprisingly cheap. And that means that if we build more features like B and less features like A, that alone would significantly increase the amount of value that we build and giving to our customers. But unfortunately, in this case, we had to build both to learn the result. But what if I would told you that instead we could spend only fraction of cost and still learn how much customers are willing to pay? What if instead of spending months on building both features, we would run a small experiment first, learn within 1 week what exactly the potential is, and see that actually it's shipping cost and not packaging worth to build? Imagine that instead of creating the whole flow end-to-end, we would allow our users to add a few cars into a basket, go to checkout page, click on the button checkout, and then, oops, sorry, the feature is not available yet. And of course, that would cause some customer frustration. We would need to handle this situation and probably apologize and order this process manually. But cost of this experiment would be much lower, and by running this experiment first, we would know that this packaging feature was not worth building in the first place. And this auction story actually taught me a big lesson. And later, when I joined Countix, I made the deliberate decision that the customer discovery will be in the core of our processes. Product discovery. And basic product discovery means that we do not rely on opinion or gut feelings about what creates value. Instead, we are treating each idea as a hypothesis, which we then validate with customer feedback, data, or experiments. And those experiments can take many forms, and let me walk you through some of them. So the first kind of experiment I want to talk about is fake doors. And this is basically when we, instead of building the whole feature, we just building the appearance of it and track the interest. This thought experiment that we did with packaging feature a couple of slides ago, this is what essentially the fake door is. And this is the great way to understand and prioritize things. So, for example, let's imagine that we need to implement the payment flow on our website. But what payment method would our customers prefer? Would it be credit card, PayPal, or maybe bank transfer? We don't know. And instead of building all three, we can place just 3 buttons on the checkout page, leave it for 1 week, and within this week, we will know exactly where demand is, and without single line of backend code. The next kind of experiment is actually my personal favorite, is our customer interviews. And especially on the early days of the company, when our customer base was still small, it was especially valuable because it gave a qualitative feedback. So we would run each customer interview in 2 halves, and the first half is more exploratory, and we asking clients about their pains, their workflows, their workarounds, and trying to do minimum questioning, but more listening. While the second part would be more structured, and we would test already specific prototypes, either Figma prototype or maybe a live data prototype on our staging environment, and go through the flow. And basically, the goal is not to validate the value is already there, but rather to validate that customers can understand and use this value. Because if they don't, then the value is not really there. And technically, it would be usually the online call with shared screen, client on the call, the product manager, and a guest. And this guest role would be rotating. Sometimes it's designer, sometimes it's team lead, front-end engineer, back-end engineer, me as a CTO sometimes would join. And each of us would notice different issues and also would have different ideas about how to fix them. And usually we would schedule 5 to 7 interviews dedicated to one topic, and I believe this is a sweet spot because 5 interviews, this is enough to understand the patterns and separate them from one-offs, and at the same time, it's not too overwhelming. The next kind of experiment is a proof of concept, and this is technical experiment, just aimed to validate the technical feasibility of a certain idea. So, for example, can OCR parse a PDF invoice with enough accuracy? Or can a LLM model understand the context of conversation well enough to support customer? Will a database index deliver performance that we expect? Often, the best way to answer this question is just to let engineers to play with technology with production-like data. And sometimes, actually in our case quite often, that would also involve committing some imperfect code into production. And on engineering side, we should be perfectly comfortable with delivering imperfect code on production when the goal is not to provide the ultimate solution, but just get learning. But from other hand, on the product side or stakeholder side, we should always remember that prototype is not the same thing as MVP. And we do not hand in the prototype to customers. They only live inside the controlled experiment. And when the experiment is over, we need either to clean it up or rebuild it properly. Next kind is A/B testing. This is probably the kind of experiment that first comes in mind when we think about product discovery. And this is, I think, probably the most scientific one, with target group, target group, control group, statistical significance. But for me, it's more like optimization tools rather than exploration. Because unlike fake doors or proof of concept, the A/B testing actually needs both features to be production quality. And that makes them quite expensive. And besides, to reach this statistical significance, sometimes you need to wait weeks until you get enough data. And of course, this is not the whole toolbox. There are many other kinds of experiments that you can run. And in fact, the insights, they not only come from experiments, they can only come from other sources. For example, support tickets, bug reports, feature requests, you name it. But what is important that we master those tools and techniques, and we build processes around them that creates a steady flow of insight directly from customers to both product teams and business stakeholders. And this process of these steady flows, this is what calls continuous discovery. So meaning having at least weekly touch points with customer, and each touch point is a small research activity. And experimentation is not one-off campaign. This must be a working routine. This continuity really matters. And the other thing that also matters is velocity, because chances of finding the great solution depend on how many experiments you can actually run within an amount of time. Imagine that chances of success for each idea is 30%. Then if we just take one idea and go straight to implementation, then it's a 30% shot. But if we take 3 ideas and can validate them and pick up the best, then the chances rise already to 65%. And if we are able to run 10 experiments within the same amount of time, then the chances go to the 97%, so it's almost certain. So then the next question is, how actually can we run 10 experiments instead of 1? And Here we come to the second critical factor of performance I wanted to talk about today, is the frequency of releases. Basically, it means how often we deploy the changes in the code base to our production. And higher release frequency means the shorter lead times and strongly correlates with overall performance. This is not unsupported claim. This has been actually proven empirically. And in 2014, a State of DevOps research surveyed thousands of companies, and they found out that teams that are releasing faster are more likely to achieve their business goals. And what is important, I'm talking about real business goals, not technical goals. So things like profitability, market share, productivity. Or in other words, we can say that teams that are releasing more frequently are more effectively creating value. So think of back days, like where the entire operation system will be deployed only once in a few years. This is exactly what is meant by today's standards as low performer. And then compared to the companies like Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, all of them making deployment daily. In fact, by the time I will finish this talk, each of them will do at least one release, and there will be no big announcement. In fact, we barely even notice the changes. They are small, frequent, and lightweight. It may sound counterintuitive, because why would release frequency even matter for the total value created? If I'm paid my salary weekly instead of monthly, would it really increase the amount of money I'm getting? Of course not. It will be divided accordingly. But if I would take my salary and put it into bank, then it will earn interest. And in the long run, that would have a significant compounding effect. And this is why in our company we embraced another continuous practice, which is called continuous deployment. And continuous deployment means that basically every merge that we are doing into our main branch, once it passes automatic checks, goes straight to production. There is no manual approval, there is no human interaction, no release branches, no bundling different features into one release. In fact, on contrary, most of our features will involve multiple releases across several applications. And to make this possible to work, we separate release from rollout. There are two different things. So basically, every merge goes straight to production, but behind a feature flag. And that means that our code is, when it's deployed, is inactive, and we're starting to test our feature on the test environment already after it's technically on production. And if the feature works as expected, then it's basically up to product manager when to switch it on, and they may do it immediately, they may do it in the beginning of the next month, or maybe for target audience of 10% of the customer. If feature doesn't work like expected, then it's also no harm done, because code is still inactive. And in fact, the fix may follow just in 30 minutes. Also, we would have quite sophisticated automated testing in our pipeline, and as a rule of thumb, I would expect each developer to merge at least one pull request in a day, which basically means one release per day per developer. And during the polishing phases, it actually can jump to multiple releases per hour. So continuous discovery validates what actually creates value. Continuous deployment gives us a speed to deliver it fast, and also they have this reinforcing mutual effect. They work really nicely together. Imagine that we speak to a customer in the morning, and we notice a few issues, like trivial bug, or unclear label, or wrong design choice. Thanks to continuous deployment, we are able to fix all these issues by lunchtime, and the afternoon we're talking already to the next customer. The previous issues are gone, and this is basically makes us to discover new issues which were previously hidden. With each cycle, it compounds, and this pushes the delight of the product to up, or we can say also willingness to pay. So let me also share some numbers, what it meant in context. We would make, on average, 11 releases per day. And this is with a single product team, I will remind you. That directly converts into shorter lead times, meaning the time needed for a ticket to go from selected development to complete. So half of our ticket would be complete somewhere between 2 hours and 3 days, and the other half, usually the more complex one, would take about somewhere between 3 days and 3 weeks. This speed, combined with weekly discovery touchpoints, gave us, so accelerated our value creation and moved the business forward. And under 4 years from our first commit, our company was acquired, marking our successful exit. All right, so I am almost done. And if you could take 3 advices that are actionable and can help you to create value in your companies, then let them be those 3. The first one is increase deployment frequency. If you're deploying once in a week, then aim for twice. If you're deploying daily, then aim for hourly. And when it becomes painful, then improve your automation. The compounding effect of this will be enormous. Second, prototype. Collaborate with engineers and find a way to validate the value potential before you do the full implementation. And the third is regularly speak to your customers. Ideally weekly, and if you already do it, then it's great, but most of the teams do not. This is the best reality check that you can have. That was it. Thank you.